what are other factors of, yeah, please. Skew to where, what side? Skew to where? To the incumbent, right? Tilted to the incumbent. And what else? Do you hear what are keywords are you hearing? Do you hear the keywords of abuse? Abuse the power. Yeah, please. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So the incumbent party has an authoritarian abuse, which is undemocratic activities like breaking out the rule of law, something like that, right? Yeah, please.
And also like media access is part of that. Like it is regular for the incumbent to have more media access than the opposition party.
Yes. So the opposition party has a disadvantage of making propaganda or making advertisement for running the elections. Yeah. What else? Well, we just listened to the two authors of the book, Comparative Authoritarianism, which is now very famous, a classic book on comparative politics right now. So this is something in between. I mean, in a full autocracy and something full autocracy in the one side and democracy in another side, and it is something in between. And sometimes we call it as a hybrid regime because it is authoritarianism in nature, but there are some democratic institutions running in these regimes. Okay. So before that, let's get started with the recent, how to say that, partisan debates or some of the debates in Taiwan right now. So there was an anti-dictatorship rally in Taipei last week, okay? Anti-dictatorship, fighting against dictatorship in Taipei, okay? Held by the opposition parties in Taiwan. So the very basic question is that, is Taiwan right now an authoritarian regime? Or is there anything, any activities of the ruling DPP is acting like an authoritarian party? Is there any of that? Can you just list maybe some of the activities or claim by the opposition parties that they are, I mean, the ruling party of Taiwan right now is very much like an authoritarian party? Can you think of any move, any law, or any kind of policy that is very similar to an authoritarian regime? Do you know did you watch the news about this? Yeah, do you know about this? Yeah, there's a big rally, right, in front of the presidential office.
Yeah.
So what happened? Why is it a claim that the ruling party is dictatorship? Or do you hear any of the claim by the opposition parties? Not necessarily of your observation, but what are the claims by the opposition parties? Well, there was basically, I mean, the opposition parties claim that the DPP is doing some of the political prosecutions against the local branches of the KMT, right? And also there is a claim that the opposition leader, Ke Wen-je, who was now in jail, well, because of a corruption scandal. And the opposition party claimed that that is a political persecution instead of a judicial one. Well, do you understand what happened right now? Yeah, so there was a recall actions in many districts, right? Recall against the KMT legislators. And then the KMT want to do the recall to the DPP legislator as well. However, the KMT campaigns, they collect the signature by their own. I mean, they copy They copy the address and name of each electorate instead of collecting the signature by one. Okay, so that is why a lot of the local branches of KMT are now under investigation. Okay, and then KMT claimed that DPP is authoritarian regime. Okay, which is a nonsense to me because you cannot sign a name for others, right? Okay, so is Taiwan close to a democratic backsliding as the authoritarian, as the opposition party claims, or in recent years there's a lot of claim that Taiwan is an illiberal democracy, also from the opposition parties. For example, our former President Ma Ying-jeou claims that Taiwan is an illiberal democracy, and he even claims that China is now moving toward democracy. Okay, Xi Jinping is now moving toward democracy by our former President Ma Ying-jeou. Okay, so after taking this class, I expect that everyone should have some ability to maybe look up to some of the index of how do people evaluate democracy in an authoritarian regime, and how to differentiate democracy and the authoritarian regime. Okay, yeah, please.
I would say, I mean, focusing, of course, I don't live in Taiwan, but I feel like Taiwan is not an illiberal democracy. It's like there are free and open elections, and there is not a clear election fraud thing behind the scenes. I think
Yeah.
in an illiberal democracy, is that things are, the democratic process is kind of fake in public, and it's more authoritarian behind the scenes. It doesn't seem like that's what's going on.
Yeah. So illiberal democracy is basically the same concept as the competitive authoritarianism we are going to discuss today. Okay, so for example, we can look up to Freedom House. Like Freedom House, they have an evaluation every year for every country in the world. So we see that from the scale of 1 to 100, China is now at 9, and Taiwan is now 94. So there's no way, not even close, that China is becoming more democratic and then Taiwan becoming authoritarian regime. There's no way. There's no sense. It's not even close, okay? It's not even on the table. So even if, okay, in the very worst scenario that Taiwan maybe have some up and downs, so maybe 94 this year, maybe 92 next year, then it is still very democratic, okay? It's still very democratic. So what are some of the examples of the democratic backslide? Democratic backslide. Can you imagine some of the examples? We mentioned, well, in this semester, we mentioned that, for example, Turkey, right? Turkey was a democratic country. Like they have about 70 or 80, and now they are, maybe you can Google it. Maybe they are now 40 or 30, like something like that. Or Hungary, okay? Hungary was a free democracy before, but the Prime Minister Orban just changed everything, and then they are becoming more authoritarian regime right now. Okay, so we have some of the evaluations like Freedom House, like economists, like like there's a project called VDAM at University of Stockholm, 斯德哥尔摩大学. So there are different ways to evaluate democracy and authoritarian regime. So any claims that Taiwan is a dictatorship is nonsense, okay, to me, okay? So you can absolutely criticize the ruling party. That's fine, okay? That's necessary. Everyone should criticize the authority. Everyone should criticize and monitor the ruling party. But we have to have some reasonable reasons, okay, to monitor or to criticize, okay? 到目前为止可以听得懂吗？就是说最近很多人说台湾很独裁啊，什么要占独裁什么的，但是台湾非常民主，而且你根据任何的那一种就是指标来看都非常民主。 OK， 那就算台湾的民主政治有一些波动，你也不会说它是独裁。OK， 这个距离太远了，好，距离非常真正独裁非常遥远。可是很遗憾的是，我们的这个在野党会一直不断的说什么台湾很独裁或什么的。哦，对我来说那是非常的这个就是误导的一种说法。OK。So last week we talked about the military dictatorship. So military dictatorship is there are a group of military officials. It's called junta, and they rule. I mean, this group of people rule, and this group of people also constrain on the leader. Okay, the leader cannot do whatever he wants. Okay, the junta constrains the leader, and these members, I mean, the member of this group of people from the military hold some key positions. Okay, this is a military dictatorship. So let's talk more about illiberal democracy and competitive authoritarian regime. So this term was made famous by a scholar or journalist, Fareed Zakaria, okay, in 1990s. I think it's 1994 or 1995. There's some discussion about this. But before him, well, there were already some of the discussion, but he made this term very famous, okay, by an article on foreign affairs. By the way, foreign affairs is always the most important magazine, international magazine, that every significant debate, every important debate will on foreign affairs or foreign policy. So I really encourage you to read the articles there, okay? So Fareed Zakaria, he discussed about this term, illiberal democracy, which means that a lot of countries that introduce democratic institutions, like elections, parties, but they are still not liberal, okay? Liberal means that, the definition of liberal is that the country will protect our human rights, our individual rights. You can participate in the politics. You can move, you have freedom of speech, etc. Okay, that is liberal. Okay, liberal. So illiberal democracy means that even if there are some democratic institutions, then it's still not liberal. 就是他开始发明的这个，就是讨论这一个，就是不自由民主这个概念。他发现说，很多的国家虽然有民主制度，比如说选举啊、有国会啊等等，但实际上仍然是没有办法保障人民的自由。Okay, so but it is very weird that if you cannot protect people's individual rights, can you be categorized as democracy? So many people feel very odd to use this term. So there are a lot of discussions later. So many years later, in 2002, there's a Journal of Democracy, a special issue. That is, whole issue is about this term, hybrid regimes. That is, in some countries, there are elections, but it's still not democracy. Okay, so this term was introduced by Larry Diamond. And also in this special issue, we have the book, we have the first draft of the article, Competitive Authoritarianism, by these two authors, Stephen Levitsky and Lucan Wei. Okay, also they have the article in this special issue. And then 8 or 10 years later, almost 10 years later, they finish the book. Okay, it takes a very long time to develop an academic project. 就是在这个特刊当中呢，在这个民主季刊的特刊当中呢，大家开始讨论说，我们是不是应该不要再用不自由民主来称呼这些国家，因为他们不是民主，他们不是民主，所以我们叫它，要不就叫它混合政体，要不就叫它 competitive authoritarian regime. Okay, so earlier in this semester, a student asked me that, well, can we call them? I mean, some scholars call this regime with another names. Yes, everyone can have your own name, but the scientific community is always like this. You have to persuade others. So sometimes a term will just stand out. So competitive authoritarianism becoming more and more popular. This term becoming more and more popular. So this term is now a term to describe some countries in between democracy and authoritarianism. Okay, some countries in between. This can be called comparative authoritarianism. Okay. So do you remember that in the very first beginning of our semester, we introduced the dichotomous, the binary category, right? The binary category of democracy and authoritarian regime. So sometimes you can still find it, maybe the binary is cutting at here or something here. Because what are the criteria of the binary? Well, if we have the the test, the exam, final exam, then I think this is very essential. So what are the criteria of the binary category? Well, there must be elections periodically, right? And the center of the government should be elected universally, right? And then there must be uncertainty, irreversible, and uncertain, irreversible, and repeatedly of the elections, right? 就是如果要二分法，民主或者独裁，你必须要符合最低标准的 minimum requirements of democracy. Okay? So minimum, I mean, if we have the binary, then the cutting point might be maybe here or here, somewhere here, somewhere here, because starting from here, the competitive authoritarianism is where the incumbent can skew the rules, skew the playground. Okay, so just like the clip shows, there are some kinds of uncertainty. Sometimes the incumbent will lose, sometimes. But in most of the times, incumbent will win because they control the game. Okay, here. So there's no or very little uncertainty there. So they cannot meet the minimum requirement of the democracy. OK， 就是我们用二分法的话呢，那个 cutting point 大概会在这边左右吧。因为从这个 comparative authoritarianism 开始，那个不确定性，选举的不确定性就非常小。好，就是那个独裁者或是执政者，他可以用各种方式来对付那个反对者。OK， 所以在这个地方开始呢，大概就是绝大多数，就算是有选举，那个 incumbent 也一定会赢。好，所以就是这个他大概从这边开始就二分法，他就是没有办法符合那个定义的。OK，but we also introduced that there are pros and cons of the binary one and then this scale one, right? For the binary one, it makes it very clear that which country is democracy and which one is authoritarianism. But in the scale, we can have different levels of democracy and authoritarianism. Okay, so we can see that some countries are more democratic than others, and some countries are more authoritarian than others. This is the advantage of using scales. Okay. So we also behind these rationales of the leaders, let's combine some of the themes next week. Well, because we have a huge adjustment of the schedule, right? For authoritarian survival, there are two main tools we already introduced. One is repression or coercion, one is cooperation, right? So competitive authoritarianism is where cooperation becomes one of the main tools of the dictatorship. Okay? But that does not mean that the dictator does not rely on the repression. Okay? So you can imagine that every regime, there are combinations of repression and cooperation. There's a combination. So from this side, there are more coercion than cooperation. From this side, maybe more cooperation than repression. But they both exist. Okay? Repression and cooperation. So for repression, it's very easy to understand. It's just physical sanction against individuals. Physical, violent, or put in jail, or sometimes just kill some people. Okay? But it is expensive. So it needs to, you have to have an army, you have to give the resource to your secret agent, you have to pay the salary to the policeman, and you have to build up prisons, something like that. So repression. It is the easiest way to rule by fear, okay? But often elicit backlash, that people will be angry, people will suffer, and people will not complying with the leader. And this kind of action will bring you little legitimacy, okay? 就是如果独裁者他就是专门只有用暴力的话呢，那其实是最简单的方式去统治，可是它也是最容易引起不满的。好 So there are two types of repression, okay? Two types of repression. We can see a high intensity or low intensity. So high intensity is very easy to understand, just tortures, killing, and secret police, put in jail, something like that, okay? High intensity. But most sophisticated one is the low intensity repression, which including surveillance, lawsuits, or detainment. Lawsuits becoming very common in authoritarian regime, that the leader will sue the opposition leaders by a lot of different kind of reasons. For example, the tax problem or something like that. 就是在独裁国家，其实有两大类不同的镇压。一种镇压就是很高强度的，就是折磨你啦，把你关进监狱，或者甚至把你杀了那种，哦，那个很容易理解。可是另外一种呢，更细致的镇压，其实是用法律的手段对付你，就是把你就是一直告你哈，就是让你一直跑法院，然后用很多的法律的这个东西来搞死你哈。So the low intensity repression becoming more and more common in recent years because if you use this kind of tortures or killings, then there must be international backlash. The international pressures will be on the leaders, and well, so leaders becoming more and more likely to use the low intensity ones of repression. Okay, so so we must pay attention to this. So we see sometimes the government will give pressures to the journalists or the political activists. Then it is a sign of maybe destroying democracy. So lawsuits, travel bans, or filing some infractions against the opposition, tax, safety issues, the health rule, something that will constrain a lot of activities of the opposition. Okay. So one of the very famous new book, recent books is this. So in this book, the scholars find that China now they hire a lot of gangsters to rule. So if the government needs some kind of repression, then the gangster will do for the government. Okay, and also we see that I think it's yesterday or 2 days ago, there was a big coverage on how China connect to Taiwan's gangsters. Okay, they give a lot of resources to Taiwan's gangsters in order to maybe in the future there's a Taiwan contingency, then the gangsters in Taiwan will make some internal chaos here. Okay, so this is outsourcing expression, repression. Okay. So dictators will differ on levels of repression. Some dictators they repress more, so especially the personalist one. And the party-based regimes repress less. Okay, they have more on the political institutions. Okay. So now let's turn to co-optation. Co-optation is something that the leaders will intentionally make some connections to people by some methods of elections or the parties or provide some of the official office positions in the government. Okay, so co-optation. Co-optation is very useful for the leader. So you can divide the opposition because that is an invitation of the opposition to join the government. OK， 就是合作的方式也是独裁者非常喜欢使用，所以他可以去制造出很多的，就是反对党内部的这个分歧，尤其是你必须要考虑，就是说，如果你选举永远选不赢，你要不要加入执政党 ？OK，if you are a member in the opposition, you have to consider if you are not going to win at all, then are you going to join the ruling party in order to get some promotion opportunities in the government? Okay, and also the leaders will provide you with a lot of material interest, material benefits. That is called clientelism. So the leader will provide with the people who are willing to support him with a lot of different kinds of benefits, okay? So that in exchange for your support, okay? So this is less risky than repression. But still, you have some risk of empowered opposition because if you co-opt with opposition parties or opposition leaders, then the oppositions, they still can get some of the resource. They still can maybe run in the election. And sometimes, the leaders, incumbent will lose, sometimes. Okay, so there are always some of the dilemmas there. The leader must decide what level they want to adopt. Okay, what levels of co-optation and what levels of repression. 对独裁者来说，他们必须要决定，就是你要跟反对党进行多少的合作，跟多少的镇压。OK， 那镇压有多寡，然后合作也有多寡。你要去决定，因为每一种都有不同的那个好处跟坏处。好，那镇压就是你越镇压，你会引起越多的那个反弹。可是如果合作的话，你合作的很多，你也会给那个反对党一些资源，那些资源，那些资源可能会回过头来对付你。OK， so there are a lot of different co-optation tools, including building up the local branches, the party branches to transfer benefits. And sometimes the party and the legislature are essential institutions because they provide a lot of promotion opportunities. Okay, and also the party and the legislature, local legislature and centers of the legislature, they can provide with different kind of public good. 就是这些像是议会啦、选举这些机制，它可以去决定要怎么样分配利益给就是一般人。Okay, so dictators differ on levels of co-optation. Personalist regimes rely on informal institutions like patronage networks or cronyism to co-opt with oppositions. The military regimes are more likely to rely on state-run business. Okay, the military regime, they often build up the state-run business to co-opt with the opposition. And the party-based regime, they are more likely to rely on the elections or the parties. Okay, so different dictatorships, different kind of dictatorships, they will have different ways to co-opt. 就是对不同种类的独裁政权来说，他们会用不同的方式去跟人民合作。比如说个人式的独裁，他们通常就会用一些个人式的，比如说这种NB 侍从体系啊等等。那如果是军事的政权，他们比较喜欢使用的是国营企业。国营企业，然后如果是政党式的独裁，他们就有一些政党的组织去跟人民做合作，或者是开放选举。So you can see that in Taiwan, we see a lot of military legacies. For example, the gas, the bus companies. A lot of big bus companies or gas companies, they are run by the veterans. Okay. So that is the part of the systems of the patronage of the authoritarian leaders. OK， 就是在台湾，我们也很有这种军事政权的味道，就是军人会去负责去接收很多的国营企业来做，或者是垄断性的事业，比如说新兴客运，啊，比如说那个天然气，啊，比如说瓦斯啊这些天然气，很多都是由退伍军人去垄断。那这当然就是独裁者给你的这个福利这样子。 Okay. Okay, so for repression and cooptation, the leaders must decide. Okay, sometimes if you have more repression, then less cooptation. So there's a reverse relationship. Okay. So we see that this is regime survival, which means that the longer of the years in power of the leader. Okay, regime survival. This line, regime survival. And this dash is the regular elections, legislature, and party. So so you can see if the regime establishes a party, elections, or legislature, then it helps the leader to survive longer. Okay, so co-optation by the party, legislature, and elections are very good for leaders to survive. Okay, so you can see this. So these institutions become more and more popular. Elections, parties, even in the authoritarian regimes. So here comes the hybrid regime. So we see a lot of leaders here. They adopt the parties. They sometimes allow the opposition parties to establish, and then they sometimes run elections. OK， 就是你可以看到，就是只要你有举行选举，然后允许政党的存在，反而是对独裁者有利的。哦，你可以活得反而比较久。OK。So here, this is the table from the book. So I give you the first two chapters, right? I hope you all read that. So in democracy, this is democracy. Comparative authoritarianism, it's a full authoritarianism. So there are some different situations there. So for example, in democracies, we see the status of the core democratic institution, elections and civil liberties. Well, in democracy, then it is systematically respected and widely viewed as the only route to power. So if you want to grab power, you have to participate in the free election, okay, by protection of the civil liberties. So everyone in democracies, we can run. We can become the candidate, okay? Status of opposition, we compete on equal footing with incumbent, okay? Sometimes incumbent will have some advantage. For example, he's more well-known by people, but everyone can challenge the incumbent, okay? Level of uncertainty is very high. In competitive authoritarianism, then democratic institutions exist and meaningful, which means that, yes, elections are there, legislatures are there, parties are there, but systematically violated in favor of incumbent. Okay, it's violated the rule sometimes, and then it is just in favor of the incumbent. Okay, the major opposition is legal, can compete, but is significant disadvantage by incumbent abuse. Okay, incumbent abuse. Okay, that is in comparative authoritarian regime. So the level of uncertainty is lower than democracy, but higher than full authoritarianism, something in between. Okay, full authoritarianism, there's no democratic institutions, and the major oppositions are banned. There's no opposition parties, largely underground or in exile. So if you are opposition parties or leaders, you will be banned, underground, or in exile. That is a full authoritarianism. So we have the scale there, right? There's a scale. Why not using the illiberal democracy as a term? So as another famous scholar mentions that, because it violates minimal democratic norms, it cannot be democracy. If we call this kind of regime as an illiberal democracy, then it means that it is still a democracy, right? So we change the term. So less and less people call it as an illiberal democracy. Okay, so so they are just authoritarian rule. Okay. We see a rise of comparative authoritarianism. So and this rise of competitive authoritarianism has some context of international politics. So since 1980s, and also especially after the collapse of Soviet Union, people are less likely to support a full authoritarian regime. Okay, so there's no legitimacy of the authoritarian regime. And also you can see almost every dictator will emphasize their democracy, right? 就是在苏联解体之后，或者是从1980年代以来，民主政治这个取得了全面的正当性，大家都说自己很民主，就连独裁者也说自己很民主。Okay, so the people are no longer accepting a pure rule of authoritarian regime. Okay, now and dictators will introduce some of the seemingly democratic institutions to pretend that they are democracies. Okay, and also there's a change of Western policies, the Western democracies. They are offering loans or aid to countries that hold elections and respect human rights. But these kind of policies are less likely to run right now. Okay, they are less likely to insist on the human rights conditions. Okay, so before 1990s, democracies, Western democracy will require the aiding countries to build up some of the human rights institutions or hold free elections so that they can give you aid. But these kind of policies are less and less popular. Okay, 就是以前西方国家都会要求说，如果你要接收我的这个资源的话，你一定要举行民主选举，你一定要怎么样？可是现在这样的这一个要求是越来越少，这类的政策是越来越少。Any questions so far? Okay. So, in this book, the first chapter just defines what is authoritarian, comparative authoritarian regime, and then the whole book. This is a very thick book. There are 35 regimes, so they trace the 35 regimes in the 1990s, and after 2 decades, what happened to them? So basically, after 2 decades, so these 35 regimes are all comparatively authoritarian regime in the 1990s. In the 1990s, so their starting point is very similar. Okay, starting point for them are very similar. Okay, all 35, but they appear to be in 3 different kinds of developments for these 35 competitive authoritarian regimes. 就接下来他们那本书就是去追踪了1990年代一开始的时候的那35个。Is that 35? Well, okay, 30 plus, 30 plus countries. Okay, so they trace this development of these 30 plus countries. Okay, and in the 1990s, they are quite similar. So they find it, they become 3 different paths of development. One category is, including Taiwan here, becoming a full democracy. One category is something unstable, something in between. And some countries stay in very stable authoritarianism. Okay? So they do a case studies for all 35 countries. Okay? So, well, these are the essential characteristics of the authoritarian, of the competitive authoritarianism. So you can read that by yourself. So there are always informal institutions, and there are always succession parties. Okay, there is a very clear authoritarian parties, or the parties of the leader. Okay, in the authoritarian era, and then dual game of the opposition is that the oppositions on the one side they protest against the system. However, they still have to participate in the election. Okay, even with very little chance to win, they still have to participate. But at the same time, they protest against the fundamental of this system, because the system is just violated, skewed to the incumbent. 就是这是那个竞争性威权政体的一些基本的那个特色。包括呢，它是大量的还是依赖的那个非正式的那个政治，还有就是它一定有一个非常明显的那个威权政体、威权政党。然后呢，它的那个反对党呢， 通常会有两面性，一方面你必须要抗议这整个政权的正当性，一方面你也必须要参与这个政权的这个选举，因为你还是有一点点的机会会赢。OK， 所以就是这个反对党是就是要有双面性。So for the opposition parties, they have to compete with very little chance to win, but they still have to compete, and sometimes gradually they will have more support. So Taiwan is Taiwan is a very good example. Okay. So authoritarian regime opens election to, well, this is a summary of the previously. We have already mentioned that they want more legitimacy. They want to attract cooptation with potential oppositions, and also they want to build up the mechanisms of commitment. So we mentioned 2 weeks ago that these kind of mechanisms is kind of a commitment, because without these mechanisms, then there's no way to guarantee that the leaders will comply, or the oppositions, or the elites will comply. And then they want to get real information about society. We stop here. We will start 10 minutes break, and then we will resume by here. This, okay? Let's have a break. Please fill in this for today. All finished. parties are very friendly to Taiwan, but the government.
Yeah, they are very pro-China.
Yeah, so they are working. I mean, the diplomats of Taiwan are working very hard to still limit this. Are you ready for this? Yeah. So I'm glad that the group presentation is about Hungary. So it is a very good example of how a democratic country is becoming, well, more decayed. I mean, concentrate on the dictatorship. So yeah, so please.
Hello everyone, we are group 6. These are our team members. Yeah. Our topic is an exercise of urban victor. This is a table of contents. We have 4 parts. I will introduce part A. He is the eldest of the 3 sons. His father was an agricultural engineer and a Communist Party member. Urban graduated with a law degree from this university in Budapest, one of Hungary's most famous colleges. Urban first made his mark on Hungary in the late 1980s, as the Soviet Union began to fall apart, setting up a political movement called Fidesz, or Alliance of Young Democrats. In 1989, he was still a law student at Vigo College in Budapest. He delivered a famous 7-minute speech calling on the Soviet Red Army to go home. He said, "If we believe in our own power, we are able to finish the communist dictatorship." He declared in the city Heroes Square. In 1990, Fidesz won 22 seats with Orban at the top of the party list. In 1993, Orban became Fidesz leader and was already pushing it to the center-right by the time the conservative NDF lost power in 1994. Fidesz filled the gap left by the weakened conservatives. In 1998, Orban led Fidesz to election victory and at 35 became Europe's youngest prime minister, taking Hungary into NATO in 1999. 2010, Orban, the second time he was the prime minister, he started his political transformation. For example, he changed the election system. I'm going to talk about Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban's key policies, divided into the domestic and foreign affairs. First, the domestic policy, media control and speech restriction. Orban consolidated the pro-government media, limiting independent voice and encouraged self-censorship, weakening digital independence. He reduced the power of the constitutional courts and appointed loyal judges, weakening the digital independence. Nationalism and cultural conservatism. He promotes the Western identity and proposed the multiculturalism, Muslim immigration, gender equality, and LGBT rights. Digital liberal in NGOs are frequent targets. The concept of the illiberal democracy. Orban uses the election to legitimize power but weakens a check and balance. And second, the foreign policies. pro-Russian policy. Hungary stayed neutral or pro-Russians during the Ukraine wars and proposed EU sanctions. Depending the cooperation with China, Hungary joined the China Belt and Road, often goes against EU policy to welcome Chinese investment. Interacted with the far-right force in the US, Urban supports the Trump and America first values, gaining a popularity among the US conservatives, taking a tough stance on the EU. He regularly clashed with the EU on the road and law and rights. In 2024, he made unauthorized visits to Russia, China, and Ukraine calling his mission. In short, Urban leads with the nationalist authoritarian style that challenges democracy, norms, and EU unity.
His human rights and social impact is also not so good. Under his rule, the erosion of democratic institutions can be seen by the judicial reforms that are centralized power and threaten the independence of court. Also, the decline in media freedom. Now, most media outlets are in the hands of government-friendly individuals and are promoting the party's propaganda. The suppression of civil society is also seen by NGOs receiving foreign funds are threatened and targeted by the foreign agents law, and they are criticized being foreign agents, and especially organizations supporting refugees and minorities face harassment and critics. The anti-migration policies, especially around the 2015 refugee crisis, is also a big problem under the Stop Church law. They criminalized aid to undocumented migrants, and they took a harsh stance against migrants because Hungary is like at the border of the Schengen zone, so the east border and also the south border is the Schengen zone border as well. So we have like heightened importance, and they promoted these anti-migration policies as a stance against the EU. Also, there were several attacks of the academic freedom, the forced closure of the Central European University, and its relocation to Vienna. This university was founded by George Soros as well, so they also attacked this university by the foreign agents law, so they didn't like that the money came from foreign funds and it was independent from the government. Also, a lot of political takeovers of private institutions. Now many universities and schools are in the hands of friends and allies of Orban or organizations that are friends or allies. Also, the educational system, like the curriculums, are changed to promote the propaganda. Gender studies have been banned in universities. On the top, you can see the protest against the academic freedom clause. And on the bottom, the current LGBTQ protest. The restrictions started in 2021 when they passed the law protecting the children, meaning that any content that is promoting the LGBTQ identities are restricted to minors, so you cannot have anything taught in schools or the media. And right now, this year, they banned Pride, or tried to ban Pride, and that's why the protests are happening now. And the Budapest government is the Budapest mayor is opposition party member, so he's also protesting. So he says that there will be pride, but we'll see what happens.
Okay. Our presenting the Owen Victor International Relation is historical evaluation. First, let's discuss Owen and European Union. Owen has often clashes with EU, especially over the issue right in migration, press freedom, and rule of the law. His anti-immigration politics and media control has sparked strong criticism from the EU. While the EU accused him undermining democratic value, Owen defends these actions as necessary to protect Hungary's sovereignty. Next, let's move on to Owen's relation with Russia and China. Owen has built closer ties with both countries, which goes against the traditional EU stance. He stands a major energy deal with Russia and supports China's Belt and Road Initiative, raising concern about Hungary's political direction within Europe and EU's unity. Finally, evaluation of Orban. Domestically, Orban is praised for economic stability and national pride, but he faced criticism from his authoritarian tendency, particularly his control over the media and judiciary. On the international stage, the EU criticized his human rights record and democratic backsliding. However, Russia and China view him positively, appreciating his resilience to Western influence and strike a strong ties with their countries. Now, I'd like to raise a couple of discuss questions for everyone to consider. First question is, Orban's authoritarian approach justified by Hungary's historical context and national interest, or does the threaten democracy principle? Second question, does the economic dominate a nation's political system? If the country shifts toward an authoritarian regime due to the economic issue, can these still be considered a form of democracy? This is our reference. This is our presentation. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. What is the meaning for the second one? Is there any economic crisis in Hungary? I mean, how does Orban persuade people to give him more power? I mean, when he runs for a very long time. He runs the country for a very long time, right? How does he persuade people that he deserves another term, or concentrate the power, or sometimes maybe closing the universities, or sometimes? How does he do so? Yeah.
But it's always like claiming that it's better. It's the right thing to do. It will help people and help the economy.
Mm-hmm.
People kind of morally. So there's always it's not like kind of pointless. It's just a reason that's supposed to be helping people.
I mean, how does academic institutions like Central European University, which is a very good university, right? And how does this hurt people? How does the dictators show that it hurts people. Yeah, please, anyone who knows the propaganda by Orban, why he want to close this? Yeah, please.
There's like we see like many policies and propaganda against the church, and like this university was a part of that, and they said that it's like founded by foreign agents and like traitors and everything, and it promotes the Western EU propaganda, the LGBTQ rights, all this stuff, which is like in the more conservative voters, it's like it goes against their views.
Okay, so basically liberal ideas, democratic ideas, and EU, and it is so weird that Hungary is a European country, is a member of the EU, right? But he still attacks the idea of EU integration, which is very weird. And for the minorities, immigrants, like LGBTQ people, well, it's all under attack, okay? And Central European University is just mainly funded by capitalists like Soros and businessmen. And they are quite resourceful. So make it a very good university, okay? So sadly, it is forced to close, okay? And also, so in many places, you can see that the dictators will claim that the media freedom and democratic institution, judicial ones, checks and balance is a danger. It's dangerous for the ruling. It's dangerous for economic development. The context of this is always like, if there's a constraint on the leader, then the leader cannot do anything, and the leader will be constrained. The leaders will be limited, and the leader must do something that is beyond the law, so that they can make quick decisions to economy, something like that. Okay, but it turns out that on average, democracies are doing far better than authoritarian regimes in terms of economy. Okay, why? Because checks and balance is always very important. Okay, checks and balance, and because checks and balance will stop leaders making some bad decisions. Okay, and even if the leaders make some bad decisions, then next time there will always be opportunity of change it. Okay. 就对我来说，民主政治最重要的地方是说，有人可以去阻止领导者做出非常笨的决策，而且就算领导者做出非常笨的决策，有修正的机制。OK， 可是独裁政治是没有的。Okay, so on average, democracy is doing far better than autocracies in almost every dimension, almost every index, like life expectancy, like economic development, the household income, almost every index. Okay, so well, yeah, but still the dictators will persuade people that he can do everything. Okay, he can do everything. Okay, so any questions about Hungary or Mr. Orban? Or anything you want to add? Okay, so I prepared some of the questions for you for the 2 weeks later. We will have a discussion session. Seems like I forgot to bring it here. Okay, it's not here, but so you can. I already uploaded it to the to our folder. Let me get through some of it. So next week we are going to 海基会, straight exchange foundation. So again, please be there by 10 o'clock. Okay. So if you have class earlier, then maybe please ask your teacher to leave earlier. So I already upload these documents on the folder. And I will also upload it later to the Trump class. Okay. So next week we are going to the field work, and after the field work we will provide you with a small lunchbox. So please remember to register for that. If you are not going to do that, please tell me. Please explain to me. And each group, please make turns that you explain everything to the international students. Okay, so because most of the field work will be in Mandarin. So please, each group, you take turns to translate. Is that okay? And then next week, we are going to do the discussion questions. This session counts for 10% of the semester grade. I will say maybe at least 10% because maybe we will do some adjustment for the final exam. So we will make some adjustment, but I will let you know, but at least 10%. So, we are going to do in groups. So please, each group, please do some work together to make sure that you can answer as many as possible. So basic point for each response. I will ask you a lot of questions, and each response worth 5 points, okay? And with a starting point at 40. So each group will have a basic point of 40, and if you respond to one question and then 45, and so on. And the second one will give you 50, something like that, okay? So each response worth for 5 points. So as many as you can, and max is 120. So if you are exceeding 100, then this will be your extra point for the semester. And well, this is for local students. I expect to hear the sentences. Okay, so try your best to answer. Okay, and extra point for individuals. If you are very good at or you answer a lot of questions, then maybe we will give you extra points. Okay, and also please take turns. Do not just let only one person to answer. Okay, if just one person in one group just answer all the time, then I will not let you speak. Okay, so please take turns. Everyone, I expect many of you can just speak. So here are some of the questions for reference. I will basically ask you these questions, but not limited to these questions. Okay, so you can just read that by yourself. This document is already on the document, on the folder. Okay, and these are just basically summarize the story, some of the big events. Well, you have to know the different characters there. So, for example, who is Napoleon? Compare Napoleon and Snowball, something like that. Okay, what do they each represent politically or ideologically? Well, it's an open question, right? Why do the animals following Napoleon and not Snowball? How do the pigs rationalize their monopoly of all resource and power? Well, how does they control or influence psychology and propaganda? Okay, something like this. It's quite open. I think that's not very difficult to answer. Well, as long as you read the book. What happens to the windmill? What does the windmill symbolize? Okay, the windmill. Why do the leaders make some seemingly bad decisions? And they keep doing that. What is the purpose of building the windmill? Okay. What does the squealer play in the story? Well, I previously have a Facebook post on squealer because we have a lot of squealer in our Taiwan's party politics. 尖叫者哈，咆哮者也是一样哈。 Okay? What are the 7 commandments, the 7 principles of that? How do they change? So what is the boxer represent? Okay? And then we have a lot of open questions here. What do you think the authors want to message, the signal others, and the main message? Oh, I like this one. Do the animals share any responsibility for the rise of Napoleon dictatorship? Okay, and if you were one of them, will you act differently? Okay, I mean, this question is basically, under dictatorship, how do citizens react? Will you join the rally? Will you join the opposition? Will you oppose such dictatorship? And how? Okay, what is your decision? So it's quite an open questions. I expect to see many different questions, and then maybe some rebuttals as well. Okay? And then Autocracy Inc. Basically, this is also a very easy book because it's very thin. So basically some of the basic definitions, examples, how do these autocracies cooperate together, how do they use international institutions or social media to promote their power, and some of the Western enablers, like banks, universities, PRs, law firms, to help these dictators. Okay, so it's just described very well in the book. And then, how do autocracies try to undermine democracy abroad? So this is also a very broad questions. Well, in what ways do Taiwan and its democratic allies face pressure from Autocracy Inc.? So specifically, we have local context here. So how can Taiwan resist these influencers? Well, you can see a lot of news recently. It is basically, it's not news because they are already there for a very long time. Okay. So what strategies can democracies adopt to defend themselves from coordinated authoritarian influence? What roles can individuals, like students, like you, to play? Okay. It's also a very open questions here. So I expect to have this. Yeah. Okay. So in groups, you can maybe have some more details, division of labor for more details for some part of the book. Just not concentrate on specific person. Okay? Do you have any question? Okay. Should be very exciting. No? Okay. I just want to force you to speak. Well, as you can see that we have many, in each week, we always have slides that we don't have time to cover. So I just encourage you to read all of the materials and maybe read all the slides, and then you can just compare it, what is this in the readings, okay? So just as I said, we only have 2 hours per week, and this, I don't expect to cover everything. So you have to read by yourself, okay? So this is the electoral results of Singapore. Singapore is a very good example of I don't know whether it is a competitive authoritarian regime or maybe very close to a closed authoritarian regime, but there are indeed elections, okay? There are indeed elections, but there's never has been any political turnovers. So you can see this is a vote shares of the Singapore ruling party PAP. And this is a seat share. So seat share. So they have a manipulation of rules so that the seat share of PAP is always almost 100%. Almost 100%, the seat in the Congress. And they are parliamentary systems, okay? So almost 100% of seats, 100% of seats. There's a very, very limited room for the opposition parties, okay? But still, their vote share has some ups and downs, Okay, even though they can get 100% of the seats or 90% of the seats, 95% of the seats, then there are ups and downs. So this election is still meaningful for Singaporean leader because they can see when they got only 60% of votes, it is a warning for them. They are quite unpopular. Even though they can still manage to win 90% of the seats. Okay, so this is how an example of Singapore shows that election is very important for the dictators because they can get some of the information about the society. Okay, 60% or 70% is quite different for the dictators. Okay, no matter what seats they can get. Okay. So, but the opposition parties are, well, doing very hardworking in Singapore, and they are always, well, highly biased rules. Okay. Well, one of the major findings in the books of Levitsky and Wei is that they find a way to theorize or to explain why some countries become democracy. Okay, and I like that part. So they find three factors, the three main factors explain some of the authoritarian regimes becoming democracies, and they can be put in this figure. So in the beginning, so we see that there are 30 plus countries cases in the beginning of 1990s, right? And they have different development 2 decades ago, 2 decades later. So in the very beginning, if the country has a very high linkage to the Western countries, the high linkage to the Western country, then it will democratize. So simple, right? Taiwan is the case. Okay, here. And if the Western linkage is low, then you go to the second phase, the organizational power of the leader. If the organizational power of the leader is high, then the country will become a stable authoritarianism. Okay, here. Just like here, this country. So these countries are, there are very little linkage to the West, and then the leader has very powerful organizational power, like including Russia, Tanzania, Zimbabwe, Mozambique, Malaysia, and others. Okay. 他们用一个非常简单的架构就可以来解释民主化哦，就是在第一个步骤就是说跟西方国家的那个连结，如果跟西方国家连结非常高，那你就有非常高的几率会民主化，像是台湾一样。如果在第二个阶段哦，就是你跟西方的连结不高，可是你在独裁者本身的那个组织力量很高的话，那你就会成为稳定的独裁国家，像是刚才提到莫桑比克、马来西亚、这个俄罗斯这些。So in the third phase, if there's a little or low level of Western linkage, then low level of organizational power of the leader, then there are the third factors here, that is a Western leverage. It's kind of very similar to the first one. But the Western leverage here is, they have their own definition. So high, then there's unstable authoritarianism. If the Western linkage is low, then it will becoming a stable authoritarianism. Okay, so you can see that it means that the Western countries have some ways to connect with the people there. Some ways there. And there are some of the ups and downs between Western leverage and the organizational power of the leader. Okay, so it's unstable. So here are the figures for how the linkage with the Western countries influence the passage of democratization. 就这张图解释的是跟西方国家的连结如何造成民主化。So you see that when the government has some abuse or to the individuals or to the system, then there will be some international actors will put some more support for the internal one, the domestic actors, and put more pressures to the leader, the dictators. Taiwan is a very good example here. So in Taiwan, the government of KMT, in the authoritarian era, they have a lot of human rights abuse. Sometimes they even kill American citizens, like Jiangnan An. Okay, the journalist Jiangnan, who want to write a personal book for Jiang Jingguo, and then was killed by a gangster sent out by Taiwan Jiang Jingguo's government. So there are some abuse. Then the international actors, including some of the democratic activists and the U.S. Congress, okay, congresspersons, they will support for the domestic actors, including activists, students, and even some politicians. They also give pressure to the dictators. For example, they force Jiang Jingguo not to give the power to his son, okay? And they force Jiang Jingguo to open to the party and to the opposition party and the freedom of speech. So it is backed up by the U.S. Congress. Why can the U.S. Congress force Jiang Jingguo to do so? Because Taiwan is highly reliant on the U.S. Okay. So, for example, the arms sales from the U.S. is maybe the only resource Taiwan can get. So the U.S. can easily requires Taiwanese government to do something, to do some reforms. Okay, because the linkage is very high. The linkage here of Taiwan to the U.S. is very high. The U.S. can basically require the Taiwanese dictators to do some of the reforms. Okay, because Taiwan is highly reliant economically and in terms of national security to the U.S. 就台湾的民主化过程当中，因为我们跟美国连接非常深，而且我们非常依靠美国，而且我们不管是在经济上或者是国家安全上面，比如说军购，我们就只能跟美国买，所以美国可以轻易的勒索或是要求蒋经国政府要做一些民主改革，或是要求蒋经国政府不能够去做什么事情。So for example, there was a very famous 美丽岛事件, the Kaohsiung incident in 1979. There's a big crackdown of all of the democratic activists of KMT, and so KMT. And then it's the overseas Taiwanese. The overseas Taiwanese people, they lobby the U.S. Congress to step in. And the U.S. Congress will then ask Jiang Jingguo government that they cannot do a capital punishment. And also, it requires Jiang Jingguo government to do an open trial. OK， 是那个时候美丽岛事件之后有一个大审，然后那个时候呢是海外的台湾人去要求去跟美国人就是拉比，然后呢美国人就要求蒋经国说你不能够判死刑，你也必须要有公开的审判。OK，so the U.S. gives a lot of pressure on Taiwan's dictator and then gives some support for the activists. That makes it more motivation or more possibilities of democratization. Okay, so that is basically their theories here. So the outcome is, so we see three different paths of the comparative authoritarian regime. So some comparative authoritarian regime becoming more stable, more authoritarian 2 decades later. Some are unstable. And some democratized. Well, but we also can see some of these countries will have some democratic backsliding, but eventually they just democratized. Okay? In general, we find that the more constraints on the leader, the more possibility of productivity guarantee, and more likely that better economic growth. So just not like the dictators claim that, well, constraints actually is good, okay? And also, if there's more constraint on the leader, then there are less external and internal conflicts, because everyone can find some way to maybe negotiate, maybe to prevent some of the violence, something like that, okay? Well, maybe this is the last part. Yes, last part. In emergencies, like for example the 911 accident, incident, how to say that? The 911 attack, okay? And in democracies, we concentrate power, we give the power to the leader. Well, democracy also can announce a martial law. But what is the difference that the martial law in the authoritarian era? In democracies, we authorize the government to do a lot of things. We allow the government to expand their power, right? In some of the crises, for example, in the COVID-19 era, we authorize the government that can do a lot of measures to counter COVID-19. But what is the difference between these actions in democracy and authoritarian regime? Can you tell some of the difference there? Yeah, please.
I feel like it's a lot of the officials that are elected through democratic systems that decide that, for example, with COVID, that certain measures have to be taken to protect the population, as opposed to authoritarian governments where not everyone is elected, even though people in power are still making decisions. There are different stages of people that are in power that have been elected that the public trust to take care of them.
Okay, so people who make the decision are very different the way they are chosen, right? In democracies and authoritarian regime. Yeah, so in democracies, the officials have the authority, legitimacy from people. Okay, that's correct. And any other response? So who authorized the funding for COVID-19? Who authorized that the government can do big money to invest in the R&D of the vaccine? Which institution authorized the use of the emergency money? Which institution authorized the funding of the government? Why this is so difficult? Which institution authorized the funding or budget of the government? The Congress, right? The Congress. So the most important part is that the Congress authorized all of these emergencies, policies, fundings, budget, or expansion of power, right? The Congress. And the Congress, how is the Congress chosen? Elections, yes. So it's chosen by, all of the congressmen are chosen by people. So the difference between democracy and authoritarian regime for emergencies is that even in democracies, even for expansion of power temporarily, every move should be authorized by representatives of the people. Of the people. And these representatives, the congresspersons, they are chosen by free elections. Okay, free elections, which means that people do want them to represent them. Okay, so for me, it's the biggest difference. And also, in democracies, if any leader wants to expand power, he must do it by the law. You have to, according to the law, you have some due process. You have to initiate, to propose a policy, and then the policy should go through the government. The government should propose that to the Congress, and Congress should pass it, and then make it a law, then you can do it. And in the authoritarian regime, it's not the way. There's no need. You can do it very quickly, right? You can do it very quickly without any approval of the Congress. Okay, so for me, it's very different. Even though there are martial laws in democracies, even though sometimes we have emergencies, expansion of power of the government, then still very different from authoritarian regime. Okay, 就是在民主国家，就算是有政府的扩权，或者是暂时性的一些措施，或者是一些紧急的那个命令，你都还是必须要经过国会的同意。而这个国会是人民选出来的，必须是有人民的这个正当性。可是，在独裁国家，所有的这些手段，你要对付人民，你可以随时就对付人民，根本就不需要就是经过什么授权啊，或者什么同意之类的。 所以那个差别是非常大的。Okay, I think this is the end of the lecture of all semester. Yeah. Do you have any questions? Well, it is for me. It's a surprise because I don't know. I don't know. This is a fourth year class, so we have let 2 weeks decrease of the schedule. Yeah, please.
I just have one last question about this. So the difference is that in authoritarian government, the same type of power could be transferred to like do more COVID type of stuff, but Congress wouldn't be the people that would allow it. Or Congress isn't like elected by people, right?
The Congress should always have the power to authorize or stop the government expansion. Yeah, everything the government want to do have to go through the Congress.
But if it was authoritarian, that wouldn't be happening. They could just the leader could just make the choice.
Yeah, and also some of the legislature or the Congress in the authoritarian regime, they are just no use. I mean, they are just a rubber stamp. So there will be no opposition at all. So it's just a nominally democratic institution, and it doesn't work. OK， 就是在很多非民主国家，其实还是会有国会啊，国会还是要通过啊。可是那些国会根本就不可能有任何的反对声音，所以有跟没有是一样的。所以这是跟民主国家最大的不一样。OK， so there are always oppositions in democracies. So that's the biggest difference. Okay, always oppositions and always possibility of a turnover. Okay, that is the biggest difference here. Okay, so this course we will have 2 talks, brown bag talks. One is today, and the other is next Monday. So I hope that you can maybe find some time to join the talk, to have a light lunch there, and to maybe write your notes. Okay. So if you have any questions, then just email me. So next week, the field work 就是在那个大直站那边。So please 10 o'clock there. And the 16th, May 16th, we'll have the discussion. And then the next week, 23rd, we will be academic sneaker. Okay. I will not force you to sign there, so it's free to join. But I really encourage you to join one of the sessions in academic sneaker. It's also a very good opportunity to you to visit academic sneaker, very far away from here. But it's a highest academic institute here in Taiwan. Okay, so I will see you there in D317 classroom. Okay. Okay, thank you.